Ahoy there, Captain Benzie here, coming at you with another episode of the Catskull Academy, the series that aims to teach you everything you need to know about EVE Echoes. Today's Catskull Academy is coming at you from inside the public test server for the October-November update, because today we're going to be looking at Interdiction Sphere Launchers and the Tech 6 Interdiction Destroyers that you fit them to. Now, of course, there's one of these for each of the empires. There is the Cormorant, the Coercer, the Catalyst, and the Thrasher. Of course, I don't know why the Thrasher isn't the Crasher. It would be lovely to have the 4 Cs, but there we are. And of course, when given the choice of those 4 destroyers, I'm going to go for the Thrasher, that 3-guild belt shark. So what we're going to do today is have a look at those Interdiction Sphere launchers, how they work, what they do. We're then going to look at fitting the Thrasher Interdictor with a brief look at some of the other Interdictors as well, just to give you an idea of what they do and how they work and where you upgrade to from there. Then we'll have a look at how to use and how to avoid the interdiction spheres themselves, the bubbles as people call them, because these are going to start causing a lot of problems for people like me who are living out in nullsec. Heck, even trying to do an autopilot from nullsec up to GT yesterday, I had a frigate nearly lost to a gate camp using them, so there are some things that we're going to need to talk about and how these all work. Anyway, if you do enjoy this video, let me know by hitting a like on it. Subscribe to the channel for all things EVE Echoes, ding that notification bell so that you never miss an upload, and let me know in the comment section down below what topics you want to see me cover in future videos. Finally, if you want to go the extra mile to help support this channel, you can do so by joining us on Patreon. Details are on screen now. That all said and done, let's talk about Interdiction Sphere Launchers and Interdictor Destroyers. The new Interdictor Destroyers are found at Tech Level 6 and Tech Level 9 of each of the main Empire's Destroyer branches. So if we scroll up the Destroyer branch of Tech Level 6 here on the Minmatar tree, you'll see we have the Thrasher Interdictor. In the Galente tree, that'll be the Catalyst Interdictor, the Caldari tree will have the Cormorant Interdictor, and the Amar tree will have the Coercer Interdictor. If you keep going up the branch to Tech Level 9, you'll come across the 2 variants of the Thrasher 2 Interdictor, the Cormorant 2 Interdictor, the Catalyst 2 Interdictor, and the Coercer 2 Interdictor. Now, for this video, we are going to be focusing mainly on the Tech Level 6 version, here with the Thrasher Interdictor. Very cool looking ship. Love the slate grey, kind of almost covert ops feel to this thing. That is a ship that you just know you don't want to mess with. Now, looking at the attributes and fittings, the fitting profile here is the same as the Thrasher fleet issue. 4 high slots, 3 mids, 3 lows, 2 power grid rigs, 2 mechanical rigs. Defensively speaking, though, 3,766 is a lot lower than the fleet issue. Very low defenses there. Very, very low. It's the first one that actually goes below 3,000. I think that puts it pretty much on par with the Thrasher 2. Obviously, most of that is in shield, but you could theoretically armor tank this. Point I'm trying to make here, though, is that you don't really want the Interdictor to be sticking around too long. It is not designed for that. This is kind of a hit-and-run ship. That is very much exemplified here when we look at the signature radius and the flight velocity. Signature radius here of the Thrasher Interdictor is 44.8. To compare that, the Thrasher fleet issue is 48.3, and the Guardian is 50.3, and then the flight velocity here of 322, compared to the Guardian of 303, and the fleet issue of 297. Of course, the fleet issue does get some inertia modifiers as well, but that's not what we're here to talk about. Ultimately, yeah, the Thrasher Interdictor, it's a little bit faster, it's a little bit smaller, and it is a lot more fragile. It's still got that same fitting profile, though, as the fleet issue, so it's not quite as tanky when it comes to the low slots as the Guardian, but let's have a look at what the trait descriptions here are. Now, being a Thrasher, of course, it has that roll bonus, 25% increase to small cannon optimal range. All of the destroyers, the mainline destroyers, get this, so like with the Coercer, you'll get the 25% increase to small laser optimal range. The Catalyst and the Cormorant both get bonuses there to railguns. What you will notice here is the new roll bonus here of +1 Interdiction Sphere Launcher module licenses, which is kind of the equivalent of having that whole, like with the Guardian, the ability to fit the shield field modules, or the armor link modules in the case of the Coercer, or the Catalyst variants. This is the ability for a ship to fit those Interdiction Sphere Launchers. So if you end up looking at the end of this video going, oh, actually, I quite like the look of these Interdiction Sphere Launchers, can I put them on something like a Slasher 2, or, I don't know, something like a Rupture? No, you can't. The ship needs to have that +1 Interdiction Sphere Launcher module license. I've repeated that quite a lot, because this is still something I get asked with strip miners. Can I put strip miners on ships other than the Retriever? No, not unless it has that correct bonus. bonus. Now, skill-wise here, first thing to note is Advanced Destroyer Command gives an increase of plus 7.5% small cannon damage per level, obviously 37.5 at full training. That is on par with the Thrasher Fleet issue, although you don't get the small cannon tracking speed, 7.5% that the Thrasher Fleet issue also gets. It is just the damage bonus that it gets, so it does similar sort of DPS to the Thrasher Fleet issue, but again, the damage isn't really what we're here for. Propulsion jamming, though, new skill we have. One thing just to note very briefly is that there have been some changes to some of the skills, notably the electronic warfare skills. Electronic warfare now also increases the range of things like neutralizers and Nosferatus, depending on which level you have it at, and there are two new types of electronic warfare skills added: propulsion jamming, which is for things like scramblers and interdiction spheres, and then there is sensor jammers as well, which we will cover in other videos. Now here, if you are skilling into propulsion jamming, for every level in propulsion jamming you have plus 5% Interdiction Sphere Launcher flight time. Now this is where things get slightly confusing. Flight time here is not the same as flight time would be on missiles. It's not some kind of range. This is more the duration, how long this thing actually sits in space. So having propulsion jamming at full level 5 means that you get a 25% increase to how long the Interdiction Sphere stays in effect actually in space. So of course, let's go and actually have a look now at what an Interdiction Sphere Launcher is and how that works. Interdiction Sphere Launchers are a new type of mid-slot sub-weapon, so if we open those and scroll down to interception modules, here we have them. Now there are these things called warp disruption field generators. We're not going to talk about those here. Suffice it to say that those are for the cruiser level heavy interdictors and cannot be fit to any other ship other than the cruiser level heavy interdictors. Anyway, let's have a look then at Interdiction Sphere Launcher, what these are and what they do. Now, before we have a look at the stats, yes, it is important to discuss what an Interdiction Sphere Launcher actually does. So what this does is it kind of launches a drone or a box or whatever you want to call it into space. It drops this little object into space. That object then emits a force field around it, and anything inside that force field is hit with a number of different negative effects. First of all, as you can see here, an inertia modifier is applied to any ship inside that bubble, 1,000 times inertia. That means that any ship inside that is going to be slower to accelerate, slower to decelerate, and it's going to take longer to turn and realign to a new direction. Secondly, anything inside an interdiction sphere bubble is unable to activate its warp drive. Micro warp drives will still work, as I'll showcase later, but you cannot activate a warp drive. If you want to try and jump away to safety, you cannot do it from inside the interdiction sphere itself. You need to escape that sphere, then jump. So let's have a look at the stats then on this thing. Meta level, obviously, we know is just kind of its rarity and how powerful it is compared to other modules. The inertia modifier here on a Mark V is 1,000 times. That is standard across all of them. Simultaneous modules 1 means you can only have one of these at a time, and the power grid requirement of 1 megawatt means these are very small and easy to fit onto any ship. Putting this onto an Interdictor Destroyer isn't going to chew your power grid. It's a very minor thing, and of course remember you can only fit this to ships that have the bonus of +1 Interdiction Sphere launch licenses. It has an activation time of 30 seconds, a flight time of 120 seconds, and a fuel consumption of 600 gigajoules. Now what this means here is that activation time is basically how long it can be between dropping bubbles. If you want to drop multiple bubbles, yes, you can do that and it will not erase the first one, but there is a 30-second delay between dropping one and dropping the next one. You can't just keep activating and like spamming them absolutely everywhere. The flight time is more of a kind of a duration. I wish that had been reworded to Interdiction Sphere duration rather than flight time. It's how long it sits there in space. At standard, an Interdiction Sphere, as you can see here, 120 seconds is how long that sphere will remain active in space before you have to drop a new one to replace it. Fuel consumption, yes, these use fuel. You're going to need to have some kind of fuel in your cargo hold that will be consumed every time you launch an interdiction sphere. It's worth noting that the activation time has no effect on the sphere itself once it's launched. It is just an activation time for the launcher that stops you spamming it. Once it's out there in space, that bubble will stay there for 120 seconds. There's no way I know of to get rid of it. It is just there for 120 seconds and then it'll fade and collapse. It is important to note here that it does have this prohibited in the Empire special effect. That means you can only use these in nullsec or below. If you're in a 0.1 system or higher, you are safe from interdiction spheres. You cannot launch it. You just get an alert saying, sorry, you can't do that. That's prohibited in the Empire. So well worth noting, it's only once you hit nullsec that these things start to become a problem. Now, the stats that we've looked at there are the same across the board. If you're looking at a Mark 5, Mark 7, Mark 9, storyline, or officer, all of those stats remain exactly the same, other than, obviously, the meta level. The disturbing force field range, however, which I love how that's worded, it's a disturbing force field, like you look at it and it's like a picture of your mum in a bikini or something. Disturbing force field range of 16 kilometers. This is what changes between the different levels. That is like with a shield field generator, that is the size of the bubble. Obviously, the bigger it is, the more stuff it catches. And when I say the more stuff it catches, remember, friend and foe, including the ship that launched it, are affected. You cannot warp, and neither can any of your friends nearby if you drop one of these on them. So it's a great way to troll people if you're an idiot. And believe me, good Interdictor pilots are at a premium in EVE Online, and I'm sure it's going to be the same here in EVE Echoes, because all it takes is one idiot to drop an Interdiction Sphere in the wrong place, and suddenly it screws up your own fleet. So you've got to be very, very careful of that, and be aware as an Interdictor pilot as well, you're going to lose a lot of ships in fleet engagements because you are one of the primary targets. People hate Interdiction Sphere launching ships. Anyway, as I said, let's have a look then. So at a Mark 7, you'll see all the stats here remain the same, except for that disturbing force field range of 16.5 kilometers. At Mark 9, same stats across the board again, 17 kilometers disturbing force field range. Once we hit the bubble gun Interdiction Sphere Launcher, I love the name here for the storyline level, meta level 5 one. That is then a 17.5 kilometer, and a Devour Interdiction Sphere Launcher for the officer level is 19 kilometers. That is a very big bubble. When fitting the Thrasher Interdictor, or indeed any of the Destroyer Interdictors, the first and foremost thing that you should be considering is getting that Interdiction Sphere Launcher fitted into the mid-slots. Now, I would say that, yeah, okay, you could kind of use the Thrasher Interdictor as a PvE ratting ship for yourself. It is slightly faster than the Fleet Issue, it does have a smaller signature radius than the Fleet Issue, but I would very much still be worried that that's not going to be enough to keep it alive, whereas the Fleet Issue does then have that additional survivability of higher defenses. Anyway, for the purposes of this video, shall we say, we're looking at the Interdictors simply for the purposes of actually using them for that interdiction role, using the Sphere Launcher. Now you can see here that with this fit to the ship, you have a flight time here of 173 seconds. Remember, that is the duration of the bubble. That is thanks to the ship here getting propulsion jamming bonus, 5% increase to Interdiction Sphere Launcher flight time. I've got propulsion jamming up at full level 5, so that's 25% increase to the duration of the sphere. Takes us to 173 seconds flight time. Remember, flight time is duration. That's almost 3 minutes of having that bubble in space. I've added almost a complete minute to the time of that thing being in space, and that may not sound like much, but that just really helps you maintain your fuel, and it is absolute hell for anyone in there sitting there going, well, at least it's only, it's only 2 minutes, it's only 2 minutes. No, this time it's nearly 3 minutes that you're going to be stuck in that bubble with nowhere to go. Now, of course, one of the first considerations then, if you're going to be dropping bubbles, is that you yourself need to be able to get out of it, and that is why we have a micro warp drive. I know what you're thinking. Does it have to be a GISTI C-type small micro warp drive? No, it does not. That's purely here because it was the only micro warp drive I had to hand in regards to fitting. Just get a micro warp drive on here of some kind. This is because you want to be able to drop this bubble and then get the hell out of there as quickly as possible. Yes, you could use an afterburner, but remember, an afterburner is, it's going to take you a while to clear the size of that bubble. A micro warp drive still activates inside the bubble and allows you to get out of there very, very quickly, very efficiently. Drop that bubble, get out of there. I then have a shield booster, just as a way of making sure that I can top up any damage that I take whilst I'm trying to get out of there. And I do happen to have a full brace of Mark 7 small strike cannons, just so that I can hit anything on the way in and on the way out. A little bit of damage here and there. You could go for the auto cannons, but because I'm aiming to just drop that Interdictor and then get the heck out of there, the auto cannons are enough for me. For rigs here, though, I have had just to rig in a couple of auxiliary energy router prototypes just to give myself enough power grid to fit the full brace there of the strike cannons. Again, you could go in here for something like inertia modifier. Probably a good one to fit would be inertia modifier and auxiliary thrusters, just to help you get out of that bubble a little bit faster. If you really wanted to, yes, you could rig the power grid for extra damage, things like a cannon collision accelerator and a cannon burst aerator, in order just to help you do a bit more punch. Or if you do want to try this out in PvE ratting, that's entirely up to you. But for the most part here, I've just kind of gone for a very basic fitting that is entirely emphasized on getting that Interdiction Sphere Launcher out there. Anyway, let's undock this and actually showcase this in effect. So now that we're undocked, we can showcase everything there is to see here about Interdiction Spheres. So if we first of all check my inventory and have a look at the fuel, I've got 794 plasmoids there for my personal fuel. We're out in space, and yeah, you can barely see this thing. It's very well camouflaged against the background. Not that anyone's looking at the how it actually looks. We are going to, of course, be just using the signals and that for it to lock on. But if we tap the Interdiction Sphere Launcher, notice the criminal timer goes up immediately, even though we've not targeted anything, and you get that really pretty effect of the bubble forming. Big bubble all the way around us there. And what happens if I were to try and warp out of this? It gives me an alert here saying I'm within a warp disruption zone. That is sadly not possible. If I hit approach and activate the micro warp drives though, just to showcase that yes, you can activate a micro warp drive inside an interdiction sphere bubble, then we can start to move away. Let's wait until we have cleared the bubble itself. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. You will see the edge of the bubble there. There we are, we're now outside of the bubble, so if I now hit warp, we then get no warning at all, and we can warp back to station. That is the advantage there of an Interdictor Sphere, and if I turn around and jump back to that planet, you'll see that it still remains there for a length of time, obviously, until that full flight time duration has gone. And yes, we now have the criminal timer has disappeared there, so let's go back to the planet and see what we have. It was planet 4, I think, that I had that at. So let's turn around and warp back in. You should see that the bubble is still there, and it will remain there until that duration finishes. Let's jump back. Here we go. Warping to the planet. And there it is. Boof. You'll also notice I stop when I hit the edge of it. If you are warping into an interdiction sphere, you stop when you hit the edge. Now this means if you happen to find an interdiction sphere like this whilst you're warping, it is vital that the first thing you would do is immediately double tap back the direction you came, activate a micro warp drive, and get out of that sphere so that you can then warp to a different point and get some safety. In fact, let's go to a different planet. There we go. That is how you deal with an interdiction sphere. You're going to not want to be autopiloting through null anytime soon with this thing. It is going to all be about making sure that you are, as soon as you hit an interdiction sphere, you find the quickest direction out of it, open a micro warp drive, get out of range, and then warp to safety. You are going to never autopilot in null anymore. Now that we have the interdiction spheres, you're going to have to take things jump by jump. It's also often a good idea to arrive at a gate and manually warp to a planet in that system, then warp from the planet to the gate that you need to exit from. This basically stops you from jumping straight into a bubble that someone has put in the middle of that. And an easy way to check as well is to look at how many people there are in system. If you are the only person in the system, well, the chances are you're not about to warp into an interdiction sphere. It's not guaranteed, however. You could sometimes get a case of someone drops an interdiction sphere, jumps the gate into the other system to check in on a sphere that side, and then will jump backwards. But chances are, if there's only one person in local and it's you, that you're not about to warp into an interdiction sphere. If you see multiple people in local in nullsec, do take those extra precautions to avoid warping into a bubble. Ultimately here, warping into a bubble itself isn't, overly scary because it's just me. It's a little bit annoying that, yeah, you can't warp and I do have to manually move out of this every time, but it's just that. If you warp into a bubble and there are 6 people sitting there ready to lock onto you, that's suddenly a different issue. Remember though, the bubble, you will stop on the edge of it. So if you're quick, you can turn your ship around, micro warp drive out of there, and get yourself to safety. Obviously, Anything like warp disruptors or warp scramblers can also help lock you down, so you may have to outrange those too. And with warp scramblers being added, those do drop your micro warp drive. However, you have a brief second where you can turn around, get out of the bubble with your micro warp drive active, and hopefully outrange anyone who is using warp scramblers, because obviously they need to lock on, apply the warp scrambler before you can turn around and get out of the range. And warp scramblers are fairly short range. Even the officer level one is only 15 kilometers. Anyway, I do hope that gives you guys an idea of what Interdiction Sphere launchers are, what Interdiction Sphere bubbles are, how they work, and what you need to do to avoid these things in space. These are going to cause a lot of problems. It is going to be a very scary time for a lot of people out in nullsec at the moment, so make sure that you have friends who are scouting routes if you're using big ships. Befriend someone who is a frigate pilot and likes to pilot slashers or condors or things like that, so that they can check the gates before you run your big hauler through. Because if a hauler hits an interdiction sphere, yeah, okay, you've still only got that tiny little bit of distance before you turn around and get away, but you've got such a big lumbering ship, it takes time to clear the edges of that interdiction sphere, at which point you can be locked on and scrambled as well. It's not a fun position to be in, so just don't get into it. Prevention is better than cure, and if you hear of gate camps, make sure that you send a fleet in to clear them up. That is a key point now that we are getting to in EVE, that people are going to have to start actually looking after their systems, and if you hear that your systems are being gate camped, time to get a fleet up and remove that gate camp. Anyway, folks, that is everything we need to talk about here, I think, in regards to the interdiction spheres and how they work and what they do. If you think I've missed anything, let me know in the comment section below. If you've got any questions, you think I didn't explain something properly, let me know that in the comment section below as well, and I will do my best to answer them. Hopefully we get bookmarks soon so that we can warp through systems a lot easier. But there we go. Anyway, folks, thanks for watching right the way to the end. Happy sailing, and see you in New Eden.